Welcome to our webinar on the complicated nature of today's inflation, brought to you by Seafair, the Council on Food, Agricultural, and Resource Economics. My name is Jane Kolodinsky, and I'm a Seafair board member and chair of the program committee. I'm also a professor at the University of Vermont. It's my pleasure to moderate today's webinar. It's Seafair's mission to translate high-level research and knowledge to diverse audiences that include policymakers, elected officials, and federal administrators. When we demonstrate the value of the profession to these groups, the Council increases public appreciation for research, extension, outreach, and academic programs in agricultural and applied economics. Our December Seafair webinar focuses on the complexity of the inflationary period the U.S. is currently facing. Michael Adjemian, Matthew McLaughlin, and David Ortega will present an overview of their work about inflation as it relates to agriculture, food, and natural resources. Then I will pose several questions to the panel, and each panelist will have the opportunity to provide their insights into the complexity of inflation as we faced it in 2022 and are headed into 2023. Following that, we'll have a question and answer session submitted by you, our audience. Seafair has assembled a panel of 3 experts to discuss their work, starting with Michael Adjemian. Michael is Associate Professor in the Department of Agriculture and Applied Economics at the University of Georgia. Previously, he worked as a senior research economist at the USDA Economic Research Service, ERS, and as a senior economist at the White House Council of Economic Advisors. David Ortega is a food economist and associate professor in the Department of Agricultural, Food, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. Dr. Ortega's research focuses on understanding consumer, producer, and agribusiness decision-making to better inform food policies and marketing strategies. And our final panelist is Matthew McLaughlin. Matthew is a research economist in the food markets branch of the Food Economics Division at USDA Economic Research Service. His research focuses on forecasting food prices. He's also studied the effect of natural disasters and infectious diseases on livestock producers and animal product markets. Before we start, we want to explain how to ask questions during the webinar to make sure that you, the audience, knows how to engage. During the webinar, you can put questions to one or all of the speakers by typing the question into the box in the control display, accessed by clicking on the question drop-down, as you can see on the screen, and sending it to the organizer. Now I'll hand the webinar over to Michael Adjemian. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Jane. Food prices in the United States are high and rising. This chart displays 3 different consumer price indices that are collected and published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The gold series, and the data run from 2004 to present, the gold series represent the price of core products, goods and services that are not including food and energy commodities. The red and blue series represent the price of food, goods and services themselves. And these are price indices that are all measured at different levels, but I've transformed them so they can appear in the same chart. If you look at the period after the pandemic, beginning in 2020, these are measured at a monthly frequency. You'll notice, especially beginning in 2021, that the red and the blue series rise at a faster pace. And that slope, that change, right, in the prices is what we refer to as inflation. Now, food prices are increasing at a faster pace than other goods and services in the economy. But this is not historically novel. In fact, we've seen this before. If we look at the recovery from the Great Recession in the early 2010s, food prices also increased at a faster pace than other goods and services in the economy. And in the run-up to the recession as well, food prices increased at a faster pace. If we look than the gold series, the other goods and services in the economy. If we look in the mid 2010s, food prices actually rise at a slower pace than other goods and services in the economy. So food prices tend to be more volatile, energy prices too. And that's one of the reasons that economists separate out food prices from the core consumer price index. The other thing that I want you to take away from this chart is that even though in the short run, food prices and the prices of other goods and services can move in different directions, they tend to follow the same trend over the long term. If we look at the long term, right, those series tend to move together. And the reason is because the same forces that act on other goods and services in the economy also act on the prices for food. Next slide. All right, just like the last chart showed food prices, this chart shows food price inflation. And inflation can be measured in different ways. Remember, in the last chart is the slope of those price series. In this chart, what I'm showing you is the slope measured itself, and it's showing you the year-over-year percent change in price. That's what's plotted in the red series. It's the percent change in the food price, the food consumer price index that was presented in the last slide in red. And so that's a year-over-year percent change. In fact, if you look at the rightmost point in that red series, that's a 10.7% increase, meaning that the consumer price index value for food purchased by all urban consumers in the United States, as measured by the BLS and published this morning, is 10.7% higher than that same measure that was published a year ago in December, that also measures the price of food that was purchased in November of 2021 by US consumers in urban areas. So that's what's being plotted in this chart. And you can see that food price inflation very recently is very high. In fact, it's reminiscent of the food price inflation levels of the 1970s, and that's why people are so concerned. The blue series in this chart represents like the decadal average. So it's the average food price inflation that's observed for different decades. And so the average food price inflation so far in the 2020s is more reminiscent of what we observed in the 1970s. That's why people are concerned, because food price inflation is high. Next slide. So why might it be that food prices are rising recently, right? Well, food prices move around a lot. They're subjected to different factors than the production of other goods and services in the economy, right? So there's a lot more uncertainty when it comes to weather when you pull crops out of the ground. So the explanations that have been offered by people to explain why food prices are moving so quickly recently, or moving so much recently, can be broken or segregated into two different sides, the sides of the market that they represent. On the supply side, we've seen a lot of different factors recently that affect food prices. Certainly Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which affects the availability of wheat, because 1/3 of globally traded wheat is in typical years is produced in that area. Russia is also among one of the world's largest exporters of fertilizers, and fertilizers are used to scale production all over the world for agricultural commodities. And of course, energy prices have been affected as well, and those are inputs to the production of agricultural commodities and food products. Certainly, there have been foreign policy shocks after Russia's invasion, right? India instituted a wheat export ban, and Argentina reduced its wheat export quota. These things reduce the supply of the commodity available on the world market, increasing volatility and potentially prices. At the same time, we've had an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza, which I'm sure David will talk about soon, and its effect on poultry markets. We've had various supply chain disruptions. Clearly, the pandemic and the lockdowns themselves, which may have been lifted in the United States, but may still be in place around the world, like in China. They have a zero COVID policy. You have a rising price of transportation and rising labor costs, and these things are all inputs to agricultural production, increasing the cost of production, which is essentially the supply curve. And then it may also be that food producers and different elements along the supply chain are availing themselves of market power. Of course, the question would be, why are they doing that now? That's why I have a question mark here. It's something that doesn't have a lot of empirical support, but is one of the explanations that's been offered. So that's on the supply side. There may be other factors too. On the demand side, certainly the recovery from the pandemic downturn was a lot swifter than many economists expected. Right? There was a massive increase in unemployment and then a reduction. In fact, labor markets are so tight right now that wages are rising very quickly. And the demand side recovery, of course, was aided by historic levels of both monetary and fiscal stimulus. And different researchers have shown that that stimulus has increased price levels across the US. So those are the slides I want to present this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for giving us some context of the inflationary periods over time, and also supplying some information on some of the possible causes of inflation, clearly highlighting the complexity of inflation today. Our next presenter is David Ortega. Welcome, David.
Hi, Jane. Great. So I just want to build off of what Michael has shared and look more closely at price increases of specific categories. So it's really important to note that there are various factors at play, as Michael has mentioned, that are leading to these rising food prices. So it's not just the war in Ukraine or the supply chain disruptions from COVID. These are all of these various and other factors that I'll get into that have really converged and are compounding each other and leading to the price increases that we're seeing. And we're seeing some food products impacted more than others. Once a month, like today, we get a CPI reading from the government on the state of rising prices. And we see that food prices are up almost 11% compared to a year ago. But behind that weighted average is a lot of variation. Some prices are rising more than others. Some are actually falling. And it's because of the impact of these various factors, as well as the nature of specific sub-industries and food categories. So a lot of the increases that we're seeing really started from the supply chain disruptions at the start of the pandemic that led to rising energy prices, fuel, fertilizer, and these were all on the rise prior to the Ukraine conflict, which really led to a rise in commodity prices and is contributing to the world food and energy crisis. As Michael has noted, that region is known as the breadbasket of Europe, a major supplier of grain, things like wheat, but also vegetable oil. And those commodity prices have come down quite substantially from their highs earlier in the year, but it takes time for those decreased costs to make their way down to the consumer. There was a recently released IMF report that suggests that pass-through can take anywhere between 6 to 12 months. And so this is only one reason why we haven't felt much relief for consumers at the grocery store. We're seeing things like wheat flour up 25% compared to a year ago. The price of bread is up 16%, and margarine, which is produced with vegetable oil, is almost 50% more expensive than last year. Now, it's important to note that when we look at the cost of food, the actual ingredients in the food that we buy represent a small share of overall costs. The vast majority of the costs can be attributed to things like transportation, processing, as well as the wholesale and the retail trade. And we're seeing costs increase all along those areas of the supply chain. But we also have some category-specific events like the high-path avian influenza outbreak that is now the largest outbreak of bird flu here in the country. This year's outbreak has affected over 40 million birds, many of them in commercial operation. It's really had a significant impact in the price of eggs, which are up close to 50% compared to last year. It's also affected the price of turkeys, and to a lesser extent, some chicken prices, especially earlier on this year. Another factor that I want to add and discuss to the list that Michael started is the effects of climate change and adverse weather. We're seeing drought in parts of the US, extreme temperatures out west, but also globally in agricultural producing regions over the last few years. We saw heat waves in Europe this summer. China experienced one of its hottest and driest summers on record. And this all has an impact on food. There's less food available, lower yields, lower productivity, and that puts upward pressure on prices. One data point that's getting a lot of attention or interest from the CPI report that was released this morning are lettuce prices, which are up 20% compared to a year ago and 9% compared to last month. A lot of this has to do with extreme temperatures, heat out west, but also disease that's impacted some of those crops. Potatoes have also been rising in price. We're seeing them starting to come down a little bit, but they're still 16% more expensive than a year ago. Coffee prices, looking at some frost that we saw in Brazil a couple seasons ago that are having its effect, those prices are up about 15%. When we look at the chart that I have up here with the various food categories, we see that the price of beef is actually decreasing. Some of that has to do with drought and high feed prices and production costs that have forced producers to send their livestock to market. So we're seeing a bit of a supply glut of beef right now, which means lower prices in the short term. But many economists and analysts are expecting prices to increase in a year or two as we don't have a lot of those replacement animals around. And as Michael mentioned, on the demand side, we have increased consumer spending. Compared to 2019, consumers have spent more on food this year, both at home and away from home, even accounting for inflation. A lot of that has to do with some of the excess savings and that we've accumulated over the pandemic. And this has led, these price increases have led to changes in consumer behavior. We're seeing consumers making shorter trips and more frequent trips to the grocery store. And this is all based on point of sale industry data. They're bargain hunting, doing a lot more price comparisons. We're seeing an increase in demand for private labels and store brands that are at a much more affordable price point. And what's really driving these changes are low-income households who spend more of their income on food. And so these are some of the changes that we're seeing as a result of these rising prices, as well as some of the factors that are contributing to the rise or change in specific food categories. And we can come back to some of these issues in the Q&A, but that's all that I wanted to present for now.
Well, thank you, David. I'm going to turn to the questions and answers and say that, yes, these webinars are recorded and will be available to all of our audience. And also, as you can hear, we're going from very general to more specific aspects of inflation. And so we're now going to turn to Matthew McLaughlin, who will give us some more specifics about the complex nature of inflation today. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Jane. So I'm going to be presenting what ERS at the USDA does in terms of food prices in general and how we're adjusting to these more extraordinary changes in food prices that we've seen over the last 3 years. This is work that I conduct with Megan Schweitzer, who is my teammate on the food price outlook. Next slide, please. So to provide a little bit more context to what David and Mike were talking about, what we have here on the right is a figure of different 5-year price changes across BLS's, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, major consumer categories. So here we can see in red that food prices rank 3rd among these major categories between 2017 and 2021. This does not account for the changes that we've seen in 2022. However, transportation prices have grown faster than food prices, and housing prices have increased more slowly. So we'll see if there's a change in the ordering from housing being 2nd to 3rd and food increasing by 1. But at this time, what we're looking at is food being the 3rd fastest generally growing category. Additionally, transportation and housing are the 2 largest consumer categories in terms of total expenditures, where again, food ranks 3rd. So it's important to have some context for how food price changes compared to other prices change in the economy. This is a lot of what ERS provides, is some very simple, digestible visualizations, descriptions, and other analyses of BLS and other data sources around food prices. All right, next slide, please. So through this changing environment in terms of food prices, ERS is going to provide a slew of different, or a suite of different products that are going to be geared towards audiences of various familiarity with food markets. So we provide, our marquee product is our monthly report where we provide forecasts of the BLS price indices. We provide 22 forecasts for various food price categories, and these are measured by consumer price indices. And then we provide 13 forecasts for wholesale and farm level farm and wholesale level food and ag products. So we provide about 35 different forecasts in total that measure different commodities and different food price categories. How we convey these again are through monthly reports. We have a summary findings which provides a description of why food prices are changing, and then the forecasts themselves and other data within Excel sheets. We complement these with visualizations that are, again, easy to understand, easy to access data from, and for a wide audience. You can change, they're developed in Tableau, so you can change different aspects of these visualizations to accommodate whatever your interests may be. We also provide charts of notes, charting the essentials in amber waves for those of you who aren't familiar with these outlets. These are ERS, or Economic Research Service products, where we provide visualizations like the coffee cups up in the upper right-hand corner of this graph, along with descriptions of why, for example, why coffee prices are changing. Lastly, we provide in-depth ERS reports. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have a report that was released in August that evaluates the current methodologies around food price forecasting that are used by the USDA, what areas of improvement are, and then we take a stab at actually improving the models. We'll be implementing the new methodologies starting in January. I'll describe those a little bit more in depth in about 2 slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do we expect in terms of food price changes in the coming year? So we forecast through the remainder of the current year, and starting in July, we start forecasting the next year of food prices. So for 2022, we're almost done. So we only have a little bit of data left to realize. We expect food price increases to be approximately 10% overall. This will differ by where food is consumed. This is very rare, but we actually see that food at home prices are going to increase in percentage terms faster than food away from home, barring any major changes in December. For next year, we expect food prices to increase more slowly than this year, but faster than the historical average. So we expect somewhat of a soft landing. We don't expect there to be price decreases, but rather a slow reversion to the trends that preceded the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, next slide, please. All right, and so in this very rapidly changing environment, it's very important to take stock of the methods that are being implemented. We take seriously the research that is being conducted by David, Mike, and others within the agricultural and resource economics research community. And we found that there may be better time series approaches that can reduce our forecasting error, give us more precise forecasts, and more reliable measures of uncertainty. In the top right-hand corner, we have a comparison of the 2 different methodologies, that what we're calling the legacy methodology that's been around for a while, and the new methodology, the old ones in orange, the new ones in blue. And we plot this for a particularly problematic category of dairy products. At the beginning of the year, for the last 10 years, we have not had a forecast range that included the realized inflation rate of dairy. We can see again we're often far from the right answer at the beginning of the year, but we can converge as new data is realized to a reliable forecast relatively quickly using these forecast methods, even in a very strange year like 2020. Now, we can see by March or April, and this is the onset of the pandemic, we already have a forecast that's very close to the correct or realized level of inflation, and our uncertainty around this forecast resolves as we get more and more information. Now, this is great in terms of providing better information, but with standardized approaches, we can also consider new data sets more easily. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see there isn't a comparison. There's no orange category. We just have in 2020 the forecast for food away from home full service. And this provides an example of how we could implement these new forecasts for categories that are of interest, but that we're not currently reporting on in a relatively straightforward way. Okay, next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to touch on who we talk to and who we try to serve. The short answer is anyone who contacts us. But where we spend the most time excuse me, is providing forecast, information, insights, whatever we can to those groups that are working on food assistance programs, such as SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or WIC, Women and Infant and Children Care Program. And then we have also had a slew, about 40 of these in the last year, requests from other USDA agencies, Congress, OECD, FAO, USDA leadership, you name it. We've had questions from them. We try to be as responsive as possible. We also take a cooperative approach with whichever ag economists we can work with, who we can reach out, who we can pull in insights from or reach out to and provide them help with. I think this is nicely highlighted. We're using some of the insights from Mike's research and in some of David's slides, which we happen to race through. He provides some of the visuals that are produced in USDA Economic Research Service. I think it's a great avenue for collaboration. We can provide each other with a huge amount of value. And with that, I'll wrap up and just say thank you and provide my contact information.